Hey everyone, welcome back. So if you've been seeing headlines about a new US-China trade deal, you might be wondering, is this actually a big deal or just another headline without much behind it? Because on the surface it sounds like a major breakthrough. After all, we're talking about two of the biggest economies in the world trying to mend fences after years of tension. But if you take a closer look, what's being called a deal might not be what it seems, and it could have real effects on prices, jobs, and how American businesses make decisions moving forward. And here's something a lot of people don't realize: what the US is calling a trade deal is, according to China, more of a promise to keep talking. That's a big difference. So today, we're going to break down what we know so far and what both sides are saying about this agreement and talk about what it means for you, whether you're working, retired, running a small business, or just trying to make sense of the news. Before we go further, let me know in the comments how you feel about the US approach to trade with China. Do you think these negotiations help, hurt, or are they just political theater? I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if you're enjoying thoughtful breakdowns like this one, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. So here's what happened on May 11th, after 2 days of meetings. In Geneva, the White House announced that it had reached what it called a China trade deal. The statement came from top Trump officials, including the U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. They described the outcome as a substantial step forward and said it reflected a mutual desire to cooperate and reduce tensions. Now that sounds encouraging, right? But here's where it gets interesting. While the U.S. side called it a deal, China described it very differently. Chinese Vice Premier Ha Lifeng didn't say anything about a finalized agreement. Instead, he talked about setting up what's called a consultation mechanism. That's basically an agreement to keep talking. Nothing legally binding, no specific tariffs rolled back, no changes to how businesses operate just yet. So then, what's a consultation mechanism really? Think of it like a regular check-in. Between two people who've had a big argument, they agree to meet, talk, and try to work through things over time. But it's not a contract, and it doesn't guarantee results. It's more like an open line of communication with no promises. And that's where the disconnect is. The Trump administration framed this as a clear win, something they could take back to the American public and say, "See, our tough stance is working." But China's response was a lot more reserved, even vague. You see, this isn't the first time the US and China have agreed to talk more. There have been efforts like this in the past. You might remember names like the Strategic Economic Dialogue or the Comprehensive Economic Dialogue. These were meant to foster better trade relations and solve disputes. But most of them fizzled out when tensions flared again. So, is this new deal any different? Well, that depends on what happens next. Because as of now, there are no published terms, no schedules for tariff cuts, and no clear agreements on issues like intellectual property or state subsidies. That's important because those are the core issues that caused the trade war in the first place. Now, let's rewind for a second. Remember when President Trump imposed a huge 145% tariff on Chinese imports? That move alone froze nearly $600 billion in trade between the two countries. China hit back with its own 125% tariffs, and suddenly, the world's two largest economies were barely trading with each other. That affected everything from smartphone prices to the cost of auto parts. And for American farmers, exporters, and even consumers, the impact was immediate. Prices went up, some businesses laid off workers, and global supply chains had to adjust fast. So for President Trump, this announcement comes at a time when showing progress on trade is politically useful, especially after he just signed a smaller trade agreement with the UK, easing tariffs on British cars. Together, these moments paint a picture of a White House pushing forward on tough negotiations. and getting results. But again, what's actually changed so far? Nothing concrete. There's been no rollback of tariffs, no new access for U.S. companies in Chinese markets, no changes to rules around intellectual property, which has been one of the biggest sticking points in past negotiations. That's why a lot of trade experts are urging caution. Some say this is a symbolic win, useful for headlines and politics, but not yet a win for workers, consumers, or business owners. And also, China's careful language matters here. When one country calls it a deal and the other calls it a dialogue mechanism, that's a clue that the two sides may not even agree on what was agreed. If you've ever been in a negotiation where you walk away thinking you've settled something, only to find out the other person sees it differently, you know how that feels. Now, does this mean the whole thing is meaningless? Not necessarily. Even just restarting dialogue is better than radio silence, because when a US and China aren't talking, tensions tend to rise, and that creates uncertainty, something businesses really don't like. For example, think about a US-based electronics company that relies on Chinese parts. If they believe tariffs might suddenly go up again, they'll hesitate to invest. They might delay hiring or pass those extra costs on to consumers. So even a hint of stability in trade relations can bring some relief on top of that. If this consultation process leads to real progress, say a phased rollback of tariffs or more cooperation on tech regulations, then this announcement could turn into something more meaningful over time. But for now, markets are watching closely. Investors aren't going to shift strategies until they see real terms, and manufacturers, they're going to wait until there's more clarity before changing supply chains or making big bets on exports. And that's really the key takeaway here. Right now, this deal is more of a political signal than an economic shift. Still, it opens a door, and in global trade, especially between the US and China, even having the door cracked open is better than it being slammed shut. But let me ask you this. If you were running a business that relied on international trade, how would you react to this news? Would you feel reassured or more confused? Let me know down in the comments. I think a lot of us are looking at this and wondering whether we're seeing a turning point or just a pause in a much bigger struggle. And here's one more thing to think about. Trade policy often gets talked about like it only affects big corporations or politicians. But the truth is, it touches all of us. When tariffs go up, prices can rise. When talks break down, jobs can be at risk. When companies can't plan ahead, wages and growth can stagnate. That's why deals like this matter and why it's important to look past the headlines and understand what's actually happening. So to recap, the US announced a trade deal with China. But based on what's been released so far, it looks more like an agreement to keep talking. Though that could change once full details are made public. And whether that turns into a real agreement down the road, we'll have to wait and see. If you found this breakdown helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you gave a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for more calm, clear explanations on the financial news that affects you. Thanks for spending time with me today. Stay thoughtful, stay informed, and I'll see you next time.